Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 4th of February now. As always, we encourage you to visit our website for the very latest weather observations around your neck of Alaska, whether that's a look at the satellite data or the radar view from your area, or look at the current weather observations from the weather station nearest your home. You can do that by going to arh.noaa.gov or more simply weather.gov/Alaska. That now will get you to that statewide view. You can always go to weather.gov/Anchorage/Juneau or /Fairbanks to get to your more local view. And the weather info line's open as well. If you'd like to use the phone to get your forecast information, you can do that easily by going to 800-472-0391. And if you write down the numbers that you use as you're going through that system there, you can kind of punch those in a little bit faster next time without having to listen to the prompts. You find us on Twitter, on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and on YouTube in the mid-afternoon for your daily afternoon map briefing. And then, of course, later on in the evening, you can find the entire Alaska Weather Show on alaskapublic.org, or later you can search YouTube for AKWX-TV. Things are pretty quiet in Southeast. There's been a little bit of a breeze from time to time, but all in all, things are relatively quiet as far as hazardous weather goes for now. Fire weather advisories, fire weather watches are posted across the Mat-Su Valley and the Western Kenai Valley, or the Western Kenai Peninsula, as we go into Thursday night and Friday. You'll hear more about that in just a minute. Looking a little bit farther north, a blizzard watch posted for the Beaufort Seacoast and the north and eastern slopes of the Brooks Range. Looking for that to crank up as we get into the evening hours tomorrow. And again, stronger winds from the west will likely reduce visibility, perhaps near zero at times as we get into that period. So plan on that. There may also be some additional snow, especially over the higher terrain. And then across south and western parts of Alaska, we're looking at freezing rain advisories there. Most areas tonight and through tomorrow may experience less than 1/10 of an inch, but it's enough to maybe make things a little bit slicker where you are for the lower Yukon valleys there from Hooper Bay upriver toward Grayling and in, again, the lower Yukon Valley region through tonight and early tomorrow. Now, fire weather danger is developing in south central Alaska. The first part of this picture is a strong jet stream that's coming out of the north, crossing mainly from north to south right over Alaska here. We're really going to concentrate on the effects over south central Alaska. Basically, it looks like the winds will probably be moving down fairly quickly across the Mat-Su valleys there, especially the Matanuska Valley itself, and coming down the Cook Inlet. The fastest winds will be working right over the water, but might also clip the western Kenai Peninsula and perhaps rounding into the Homer region. We'll keep an eye on that, as this is a developing situation that'll mainly really pick up as we head into Thursday evening, Thursday night, and overnight into Friday morning. Because the snow has been melted away across the Mat-Su Valley and things are still pretty dry across the western Kenai Peninsula as well, the danger for fire to spread fairly quickly is there, especially with the winds cranking up. On top of that, many folks there in the Mat-Su Valley, as well as areas up around Fairbanks, are dealing with dust right now, especially along the Cook Inlet and south central there. So the air quality is an issue already, and the fire danger is increasing as we go toward the end of the week. Here's a look at the big picture. You can already see that upper level pattern. Look for that upside down U-shaped pattern here. This is actually going to build a little bit farther north. And you can see that taking shape, that stronger punch from the south, lifting that ridge of high pressure farther and farther into the western Bering Sea. The other side of that, of course, is some colder air that's locked in place across the west, but even that seeing some moisture run up and over that, creating that threat for freezing rain across the west and the lower Yukon Valley. So we've got a strong ridge of high pressure here, but what about on the other side, across the mainland of Alaska? Well, if you look carefully here, you can see things are pretty quiet across the interior. You've got that ribbon of moisture stretching up across the west. We've had gusty winds at the surface up and down the YK Delta, the Norton Sound, and the Chukchi Seacoast. In most areas, we're looking at winds maybe about 25 to 35 miles per hour at times today. Periods of rain and snow across south and western Alaska. We've had some soggy weather there around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. In fact, pushing, I believe, about 9/10 of an inch of rain today. Kodiak Island also got fairly wet today, a couple tenths of an inch there. but most areas in the interior and southeast were relatively cloud-free as the day went. So not a bad day all in all. Sure, it was a little bit cooler than it has been just a couple weeks ago, but things have pretty much quieted down. Well, this entire pattern is going to change as that colder air is going to drop southward, and the winds will really start to pick up as we get into Thursday night and Friday again for south central. And some of that's going to make its way eventually over into southeast as high pressure across the central Yukon right now is running around 1,050 millibars. That is a lot of cold air pulled up here and just looking for somewhere to escape and drain out. And once it finds that pathway there, those winds will likely pick up where you are, if that's kind of the typical weather pattern for you when we have such strong high pressure there across the Yukon and the interior. So today's weather map shows that circulation sitting right there. All it is a big ball of very dense and cold air. And for right now, the winds are still, I'll say, breezy across southeast. The one good thing about that is it should keep things stirred up so you don't have a tremendous amount of fog. Low pressure across the central Gulf is pretty dry. It's falling apart right now, mainly to the west. You can see that wave trying to work its way northward. On the leading edge of that, we've got some areas of rain and snow. Trough of low pressure setting up across the Alaska Range there on the north side, and there's been some pockets of light snow across the Arctic coast and around Kotzebue Sound today. The strongest winds once again were around the Arctic coast all the way down the west, but for the interior things were pretty quiet under that ridge of high pressure, and once again poor air quality around the Fairbanks region and the Mat-Su area as a result of that lower wind speed at the moment. Warmer air is building up the western side of this ridge. You can see just to the west of the St. Matthew Island waters and the Pribilofs, we've got a 1,033 millibar high pressure system. That's going to scoot northward toward the Gulf of Anadyr tonight. As it does so, rainfall is still spreading out across the Alaska Peninsula and southwest. Some of that will be freezing rain across the YK Delta into Norton Sound, and that's where the freezing rain advisories are tonight. Pockets of light snow across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range should be expected. Expect the snow to pick up a little bit tonight and into tomorrow, and areas of flurries and fog across the Arctic coast. With high pressure still in command across the Yukon, the focus for that really high center will shift a little bit from time to time, but overall the trend is going to merge this to the north and west. You can see a trough of low pressure as well, just offshore of southeastern Alaska, and pockets of fog perhaps around the Copper River Basin. Things mostly quiet in most parts of Alaska tonight. As you look at the chart for tomorrow, high pressure is starting to reorganize and strengthen a little bit south and west of St. Lawrence Island. Don't be surprised to run into some fog with that. Not a whole lot of wind here just yet. As this is strengthening, it's going to really quiet things down across south and west. Look for some pockets of showers across the Gulf. The main focus for precipitation should remain across the eastern Aleutians, maybe west of Sand Point and out toward Adak and Atka. Southeast remains dry, perhaps still a little breezy there with a 1,051 millibar high. A little bit north of Whitehorse there. As that travels westward a little bit more, you'll see more impacts from wind as we get into Thursday. Pockets of snow showers there across the north slope, especially across the Chukchi Seacoast, where that may accumulate a couple inches of snow. But as we get into Thursday, look at the dramatic pattern shift. We've got high pressure now that's made it all the way up into the Chukchi Sea at 1,059 millibars. Once again, a tremendous amount of cold air supported by the upper level pattern that's locked in the ridge of high pressure there in place. So we've got a tight pressure gradient all the way from northwest to southeastern Alaska, low there in Prince William Sound, a trough of low pressure across southeast, a ridge that tries to cut its way across the interior, and the result of this air pressure difference is going to be not only pressure gradient winds working across Alaska, but that jet stream reinforcing that from the top down. That should create a pretty good pattern to support some gusty winds up and down south central, through the Cook Inlet, and probably through some of the valleys there. So once again, if you're in channeled terrain, and this is the kind of pattern where you may see some gusty winds, Thursday night into Friday may be one of those days. And we'll see how this pattern develops as we go through the weekend. This could be something that we're dealing with in south central through the better part of Thursday night, Friday, maybe even longer into the weekend. Now looking at the Arctic coast, you'll notice that flow coming in from the north and northeast. It's probably going to be looking at more of a westerly flow taking it across the Beaufort Sea coast, and probably some strong gusty winds there, so blizzard conditions may develop with falling snow, but primarily it's going to be the blowing snow that'll be your issue there, and likely looking at some snow developing through the morning and into the afternoon around the Yukon Valley, mainly north of Fairbanks as we get into Thursday, and precipitation continues across the Aleutians, mainly in the form of rain. For southeast today, temperatures held in the lower to mid-30s. Juneau about 36 degrees. Haines and Skagway generally in the mid-20s today. Prince William Sound saw temps in the 20s and 30s. Anchorage holding at 28, 43 around Homer today. Talkeetna about 14. Wasilla and Palmer, we're looking at readings also in the 20s there, 0 for Glen Allen this afternoon, 9 around Fairbanks with Healy showing 34 close to Denali. Up around Arctic Village, it was 11 below. I'm sorry, that's Fort Yukon at 11 below. Arctic Village was 6 below. Anaktuvuk Pass showing 16. The Arctic coast generally 10 degrees or above. A few places were a little bit cooler, like Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, just a little bit below 0 today. 25 around Point Hope. Kotzebue showing 24. Shishmaref 21 degrees with Nome at 28. 27 around St. Lawrence. Most of the interior in the teens and 20s, including McGrath, which was showing about 20 late this afternoon. 35 in Bethel. Nunivak Island was closer to 30 degrees. In southwest Alaska in the 30s and 40s. King Salmon 43. Dillingham 37 degrees. Most of the Alaskan Peninsula easily in the 40s. One of the warmer spots was Port Huyden today at 48 degrees, you can see there. Around the Pribilofs, temps were holding just a hair below freezing late this hour, and 40 degrees in Dutch Harbor in Alaska. Adak and Atka both in the mid-30s, and Shemya was about 35. Overnight low temperatures for the interior. Well, with high pressure firmly in charge across the Yukon, you should expect some seriously cold air, anywhere from 15 to about 30 below. Fort Yukon being one of the colder spots there at 27 below. South central teens, most areas below 20 degrees. Kodiak 34, 30s and 40s for southwest and the Aleutians. Southeast looking at teens and 20s overnight. Sitka 24, Juneau in the mid-teens, with the North Slope looking at temps holding closer to 0. Barrow about 3 above. Nome looking at 16 with Unalakleet about 19 degrees with a high there tomorrow at 27. Southwest Alaska above freezing again, so most areas south of the Yukon will likely be looking at some milder temperatures. 38 in Kodiak, 40s for places like Sand Point, Cold Bay, and Falls Pass. Adak, Atka about 40 degrees there, 40 for Dutch Harbor and Alaska. 20s and 30s for southeast, including Juneau tomorrow. Sitka about 33. Prince William Sound mostly looking at temps at or just below freezing, with Homer and Seward probably in the upper 20s and lower 30s. Anchorage holding in the mid-20s there, with the interior in the single digits, and then eastward from Fairbanks and northward looking at temps between 5 and 10 below. Flying weather tomorrow shouldn't be too bad considering visibility anyway. You're looking at IFR conditions generally west of the Alaska Range, including the upper Kuskokwim Valley into Bristol Bay, where things will probably thin out to MVFR and lift a little bit. MVFR conditions from Nunivak Island southward toward the central Aleutians, and looking at IFR conditions for the Chukchi Seacoast in areas along the Brooks Range and north into the Beaufort Seacoast, mainly around Prudhoe Bay and points east toward Kaktovik. As far as pass conditions go, we'll gradually see some changes. Now, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass may flirt with MVFR by the afternoon, but generally speaking, it looks like most of the day should be under VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely see trends toward MVFR as the day goes on, as that storm is shifting eastward a little bit more, and a little more moisture is moving its way toward the western side of the Alaska Range. Rainy Pass included there. Same goes for Windy Pass and many areas around the northern parts of the Alaska Range. We expect to see moisture moving in generally from the southwest to north and east as we go through the day there. Windy Pass expected to go over to MVFR. Isabel Pass, MVFR conditions perhaps by late in the day. Mentasta Pass may kind of flirt with that MVFR level once again as we get into the afternoon hours. Generally speaking, Tanita Pass should be okay. VFR conditions expected there for most of south central, in fact. Porter's Pass we expect to remain VFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass probably VFR through the day as well. Freezing levels then, well, with the freezing rain that we're seeing across the areas of the lower Yukon Valley, you can pretty much pick up that overrunning pattern here. We've got the surface freezing line in white, as we always do, and here's that warmer air aloft trying to lift its way northward, and when that crosses over that white line, that's when we get into that threat for freezing rain if there's precipitation involved. So we certainly have that set up there. Otherwise, the surface freezing line pretty much hugging the Gulf Coast all the way around. It is south of the Pribilofs, or north of the Pribilofs, I should say. Here's St. Matthew and Nunivak Island, and then jogs west into eastern parts of Russia with milder air south of the Aleutians. Icing potential below 14,000 feet and above 3,000 feet for the Chukchi Seacoast and Kotzebue Sound. That's probably our most significant risk of icing there tomorrow. Occasional moderate as possible, and south of the Aleutians above 5,000 feet there with an opportunity for some icing here. And again, we've got the freezing rain advisory here across the lower Yukon, so anybody trying to take off in that very lowest altitude there, at least for that time being tomorrow morning, we'll probably be looking at a severe icing threat early on. That should wane fairly quickly throughout the day. As we're talking about the upper levels of the jet stream, again, the stirring currents of the atmosphere that drive the surface weather where we all live, shows high pressure there just south of the Gulf of Anadyr. And as this strengthens tomorrow, that's going to develop the weather patterns at the surface that will allow those stronger winds to shape up across south central. But this is also going to generate some of that colder air that will work toward a good part of south central and eastern parts of the interior as we get into the rest of the week and into the weekend. And that's also going to channel a lot of that colder air down toward the lower 48 states once again, so you can brag about that if you like. Low pressure south of Haida Gwaii, working with high pressure across the northern Bering, making a conveyor belt of colder, dense air draining out to the sea at 9,000 feet. You can see wind speeds still pretty light, the strongest of which were north of that high pressure system in eastern Siberia, some of that making it across the Bering Strait. Westerlies across the Brooks Range there around 20 knots or so. They pick up a little bit at 3,000 feet. Between 25 and 30 knots, high pressure sitting just west of St. Matthew, guiding more of an east to westerly flow across the Aleutians between 35 to as high as 50 knots there. Low pressure pretty much in the same spot across the eastern Gulf with light winds across southeast. So turbulence, sure, there's an opportunity for some of that across the Kotzebue Sound and north of the Bering Strait, generally below 4,000 feet. And south of Adak and Akka below 6,000 feet there. Some of that could reach occasional moderate. There might be some chop up and down southeast as well below 6,000 feet. Most of that should remain light to isolated moderate. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned. Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes. Okay. Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit. Oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work. Sure. Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse. Okay. And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical. And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part. Yes. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes. Okay. We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker like here. Sputnik there. Yeah. There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator. Okay. So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over? Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right? So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go... Kind of like a racetrack. Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference. And you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long-range view that's looking top-down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. Again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. And we will learn more about GINA and the satellite program that Eric's involved with again tomorrow, so join us for that. Here's a look at southeast winds and the marine areas as we look at Wednesday afternoon and into Thursday. We're still dealing with mainly a north and northeasterly flow flowing down and out of the mountains there, so there could be some higher gusts in the region as you would expect. Anywhere from 3 to 5 foot seas across the inner channels and an offshore flow all the way from Yakutat down to the Dixon entrance, 15 to 20 knots or so, generally 5 to 6 foot seas, so not as bad as we've seen in recent weeks. More of a north and northwesterly flow, should be pretty light across most areas on Thursday. High pressure's trying to be in charge. We've got a weak trough of low pressure just offshore, so we're still draining that wind generally down the coast from the north and northwest, all the way from Yakutat at 15 knots to more of a south and easterly flow out of Sitka and Craig around 10 knots or so, 5 to 6 foot seas there in the south, generally 3, maybe 4 foot seas there around Stevens Passage there on Thursday. So things still looking pretty light, might be an occasional gust or two. South Central, a variable flow, pretty light inside and outside of Prince William Sound, outside of Resurrection Bay and east of the Kenai Peninsula. Down the Cook Inlet, a little bit stronger flow generally from the north. More of an easterly flow coming off the Kenai Peninsula near the Barren Islands and west, and moving west and into the western Gulf. East of the Barren Islands around 15 knots, 4 foot seas there. Easterlies coming across Kodiak Island between 15 and 20 knots, 4 foot seas on either side. By Thursday, things are starting to change a little bit with that northerly flow strengthening and coming down the inlet just a little bit. We start to develop more of a north and westerly flow coming across the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots on either side. Again, more of a westerly flow developing on Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knots there, 7 foot seas inside Shelikof Strait, and a variable flow still light around Prince William Sound. 10 knot winds there with 2 foot seas on the inside, 7 foot seas on the outside. Across the Alaska Peninsula, east to westerly flow crossing over on Wednesday, 4 to 5 foot seas on the Bering side, 4 to 12 foot seas on the Pacific side. The highest seas there south of Sand Point and King Cove. As you get into Thursday, north and northeasterly winds working over most areas, still holding onto a northwesterly flow south and east of Chignik. That'll have a 6 foot sea in the region up toward Castle Cape and the southern tip of Kodiak Island. Inside Bristol Bay, only 3-foot seas are expected with that north flow around 15 knots. Now for the Aleutians, a broad northeasterly flow working across on Wednesday, around 35 knots or so from Nikolsky out toward Adak and Atka, 12 to 13-foot seas on either side. Some slightly higher winds there from Kiska out toward Attu, 30 to 35 knots with 11 to 13-foot seas there. You'll notice a broad easterly flow sweeping across the Aleutians on Thursday, anywhere from 20 to about 35 knots tops. Looks like most areas will be dealing with 5 to 10-foot seas, slightly higher out toward the west, around 30 knots or so with 13 to 15-foot seas out toward Shemya, and 10 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side for Thursday. For the west now, you're looking at more of a north and easterly flow coming off the continent around Hooper Bay, an easterly flow out of Kuskokwim Bay, 15 to 20 knots there. Northeasterlies around the Pribilofs with a 7-foot sea. Easterlies around the St. Matthew Island waters with a 5-foot sea. Southwesterlies moving across St. Lawrence Island. Those become northerlies we get into Thursday and pick up speed a little bit. 25 knots there around St. Lawrence Island and out of the Kuskokwim Bay. Looking at 6-foot seas here, 4-foot seas around Nunivak Island out toward St. Matthew. That grows to 5-foot seas, and northeasterlies around the Pribilofs with a 15-knot wind. Now for the Arctic coast, a south and southwesterly flow working up the Chukchi seacoast there, 20 to 25 knots. Westerlies holding around 15 knots for Wednesday. By Thursday, those winds are picking up, creating the potential for blizzard conditions along the coast and the north-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. An onshore flow from Barrow down toward Point Lay at 35 knots from the north and west, and northerlies inside Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots. The winds will be picking up as we go into Thursday. For tonight, a freezing rain advisory for the lower Yukon Valley there. Looks like most areas will experience less than 1/10 of an inch. Not a whole lot, but enough to make things a little bit slick. And we've got a blizzard watch across the north slope, as I just mentioned there, including the north slopes of the Brooks Range in the east, and fire weather watches now for the Mat-Su Valley and the western Kenai Peninsula. You can go to your local fire weather information page for the latest there. As we go into Wednesday, still pretty quiet. The winds will pick up there as we get into Thursday night and Friday for South Central, with snow developing in the north. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.